Hey, gang, we're here at 4.7. We're going to try to get through 4.7 through 4.10 standard and remote this week. You should already have your templates, but what I want you to do is, since we're going to start with 4.7, I want you to skip 4.6 for now because it's a pretty just complicated concept. So we're going to wait until we do a simulation in class before I do 4.6. So just skip that for now, and we're going to move on to 4.7. I love this standard because it's really straightforward, and it's just two major concepts and talking about two different types of forms of government. You either have a federal or a unitary. Okay, so we're going to start with federal. We're going to start with unitary. So unitary, I'm going to move my box here so you can kind of see this. Unitary is where you have almost all the power at a central government level. And so in this kind of graphic, you can see the central government at the top, and then all your local governments are whatever power or laws are made are trickling down to those local governments. Okay, so make sure you know some of the characteristics here. In a central government, all the laws are made at the top up here, okay? Laws and policies are applied uniformly throughout the country. So again, that trickle down effect, whatever laws or policies are made at the central government are also going to apply to any local governments, okay? So in this case, that would mean our federal government, right at the top, whatever policies they put in place or laws they made, they would immediately trickle down to Colorado level to Fountain level. Okay, but we do not have a unitary system here. We have federal. Okay, so another characteristic is central government create or abolish local government units. So central government can go in and get rid of those local forms of government if they wanted to. Okay, and then the last bullet there is central government provides many public services such as healthcare, public schools, and more. So any of those services are going to come from the central government at the top. So that is characteristics of unitary states. Now let's look at some positives and negatives here. So unitary governments do really well in homogenous group of people, so where you have similar culture, right? And they also do well in countries that are smaller. Okay, so some positives that you can write where you have a national identity, right? Again, homogenous, where people are, very similar in their culture and their practices. That's going to create a lot of patriotic pride in their country. Okay, another positive is laws and policies can be implemented a lot quicker than having to go through all the hoops of local governments. Okay, you just have to go through one central government to get things done. So that's positive. Potential for corruption at the local level is reduced. So if you just have one big power, unitary power at the top in your central government, you don't have a lot of fallout and opportunities for local governments to become corrupt. Okay, some negatives. Move my box over here. For a unitary is if you do have any minority groups, they are often in that country with a unitary state. They are often going to get marginalized. There might be a lot of prejudice. They'll even get ignored. Okay, and then laws and policies can be dominated by a central group or a dominant group of people in a unitary state. Okay, so those are some negatives. Now let's look at federal states. You can see right away with this graphic here, if you have the federal government at the top, that this is how we work here in the United States. Then you have that power divided up between your state governments and even your local governments, okay? So let's talk about some characteristics here. Central government makes some laws, but most laws are going to be passed at the state level. Okay, and then laws and policies differ between jurisdictions. Okay, so that's just where they make the laws. So there's laws set by a county, El Paso. There's laws set that affect just Fountain, and then there's laws that affect just Colorado as a whole, and then there's laws that affect all of the United States. Okay. Central government cannot create or abolish local governments. So the federal government cannot come in and start manipulating or abolishing Colorado system of law. Okay. And then local governments must provide most of those public services, right? So services that we have are usually here in Fountain or here in Colorado are going to be done from a local level and not a national level. All right, let's look really quick at some positives and negatives. So federal governments are established because a country's population is not homogenous, right? You're going to have a lot of diversity where this usually works just like here in the United States. So some positives are going to be laws and policies are created with more of local interests in mind and what people on that local level need. And then local governments can react a lot faster, especially in cases of emergency. So it's nice to have that service set up with your local governments. And then minority groups are often allowed to maintain more of a cultural identity with the federal system. Okay, let's look at some negatives for federal system. For, where you have local governments, they're going to have different laws and policies across the country. So we as citizens have to be informed about that. Like before, seatbelts were required in every state. Like I remember driving through Texas from Colorado and didn't realize that there was a seatbelt law in Texas. So I got a ticket for not wearing my seatbelt. Okay, so you have to kind of educate yourself on different policies that are different through the states and local governments. All right, there can also be a redundancy in governments that make implementation of laws and policies really slow. So that's when you have all these local governments, it's going to slow down the process of pushing it throughout bills and making them into laws. And then the last is their potential for devolutionary forces to gain acceptance is a lot greater. So that just means if you have groups that are all wanting to separate, right, in devolutionary force, they are going to have more potential to break away than, say, in a unitary state. Okay, so I threw this map in here. I forgot about this. This gives you an idea. We'll look at this more in class of countries across the world that are unitary and federal. And you can see right there in the blue are all the unitary states. And wow, where do those exist? Those are like China's one. Lots of countries in Africa are going to be unitary as opposed to federal. You see, the United States, obviously, Canada. And then you see a few countries in Europe, but not as much as you would think. And then, of course, Australia. Okay, so that is going to conclude 4.7. We're going to move on to 4.8. Hey guys, here we are at 4.8. So I just realized that I have a typo on your template. Okay, so we're going to go into 4.8, which is defining devolutionary factors. And that first page is correct. But the second one, if you look where it says continued, it says 4.9, but that should actually be 4.8 continued. So if you want to change that really quick, it is also the second part of defining devolutionary factors. Okay? All right, let's get started. So with the standard, it feels heavy, but try not to make it too complicated. So we'll review what devolution means. But all we're doing through the standard is we are just discussing why devolution happens. That's it. Okay? All right, so let's go back up here on your notes where it says devolution. I want you to rewrite the definition, what devolution means. And there's two parts to it. So you have breaking up of a state into smaller pieces or units, okay, just like balkanization. But you've got to remember there's a second part to devolution. It can also be the passing of power from a central government to a lower government. Okay, very important to remember that about devolution. And examples of this are very easy. We've covered them before, guys. So you can put Spain with Catalonia and the Basque wanting to break away from Spain. You can also talk about what happened to former Yugoslavia and the Balkan Peninsula. Okay, so those are great examples of devolution that you're hearing over and over. Now, from here on out, we're just going to be discussing why devolution happens. Now that you know what it means, why does it happen? Okay, and so all these left in your template on this page are going to be reasons for it. Okay, we're going to start with divisions of group by physical geography. So you have situations where groups want to break away because they've been isolated by physical features, and this is exactly what has happened in the Basque region in Spain. Okay, because they've been isolated they're socked in by mountains, and I'll show you really quick. See where Basque country is, it's wedged in between France and Spain. And if you look at a physical feature, do you see all these mountain ranges around Basque Country? So they've been isolated for forever, right, since the beginning, by physical features, which is one of the reasons why, um, they are different. They have a different language. They have a different culture. Okay, so that's a great example. You can even put distance decay, right? If there's a lot of mileage in between two separate cultures, that could be another division. Okay, all right. So now we're going to move into ethnic separatism. So again, where you have is this is where you have many ethnic groups that are living in a country together, and one ethnic group wants total power, political power over the country. Okay, especially if there has been a long history of self rule in that country. And examples of this, again, will be the Basque and the Catalans in Spain. You also see this a great example with the Kurds. Okay, that they're, remember the Kurds we talked about as a stateless nation. Okay. All right. Next is ethnic cleansing, and you want to think about genocide with this. All right. That's where first the definitions where you have a removal or a killing of a particular group. All right, and what should come to mind right away is the Holocaust, right? That's when the Jews were um, dispersed from Germany, right, under Hitler. Now, another genocide that we'll talk about later this year is the Rwandan genocide. And that's where you had two ethnic groups that lived in Rwanda, right? That goes back to colonialism, where they were forced to live together and they didn't get along. And you still today have a difference. And one group went off to kill out the other group so that they could have a homogenous group living in Rwanda. Okay. So that's ethnic cleansing. Again, another factor or something that leads to devolution. Guys, there's another example of former Yugoslavia. See all these different ethnic groups that lived in former Yugoslavia that now have broken away. Devolution, right? Okay, and this is kind of cool. This is a simulation I found that you can see how Yugoslavia changed over the years. Okay, from 1991, here's going through 1992 and how those borders changed, right? Actually, I'm sorry, it started in 1989 and went through 1992. All right, now we're going to move into those other factors, starting with terrorism, okay? And this is a very familiar term, right? We all know about it from 9/11. So terrorism, know the definitions: violence organized by a group. Okay, this can be aimed at a particular group of civilians. It is just like it sounds. The idea is to entice terror, and it's usually for political reasons. Okay, we saw this happen in 9/11. That's a great example. But it didn't just happen here. This is happening all over the world. When groups do not get along, they will instill terror in other groups. Okay, we see this with ISIS as well, right? ISIS is a terrorist group. Okay, and then economic and social problems. Like, you guys kind of know what this is, so I don't know that you definitely necessarily need to write a definition in for it. But an example for Catalonia and Spain, and then Scotland leaving the UK, right? So economic factors are going to be because if they are not benefiting from the economy in that country that they're living, that's a reason that they might want to break away. Okay. And then social problems are going to be, what you've been hearing over and over is that they have a different language, if they have a different culture. That's going to be social reasons for why they want to pull away. Okay. All right, and that last one there is irredentism, and that is a movement by a nation to actually unite parts of its nation that are spread out all over the place across different borders. Okay, so this is almost an instead of breaking away, it's a uniting movement. And examples of this is going to be in with China and Taiwan. Okay, and then you also could put another example of Russia wanting to reunite with Ukraine. Okay. All right, we're going to blaze through this, and then we're going to touch on the second page where it's continued. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about mostly just effects of devolution once it happens, and some of this has to just do with advancement in technology, guys. So that first one is effects on communication in devolution. So you have advancements in communications that have facilitated these actions of devolution to happen. Okay, and there's three things that you want to put in here. Okay, for examples, the internet. Okay, because almost everybody has access to internet, you can spread similar messages, right, amongst your group to get people informed. Okay, and social media is the second example, and you can set up groups to organize protests through social media. And then what you're seeing a lot of today is videos that are actually being taken often during these protests that show how they're being abused or suppressed by the government, and that gains more momentum for their movement. People get emotional and upset about this, and they're like, "Yeah, we're on board with this movement." Okay, so that's effects of communication. The next one we're going to talk about is supranationalism. Okay, let me go. Okay, so first you need to know the definition. This is a new term that we haven't talked about previously. So supranationalism, which where you have a, a lot of different countries come together and they form one big organization. And this gets a lot of political power and they have a lot of impact and influence on the rest of the world. Okay, so some common examples of these supranational organizations is going to be like the United Nations. Okay, another one you might have heard of is NATO, right? Which is an acronym. It stands for North Atlantic Treaty Agreement. And I know you guys have all heard of the EU, which is the European Union. And that was after World War II, when Europe was so divided that they established the European Union to bring those countries back together, not just socially, but also economically. Okay. And you've probably heard most recently of the Paris Accords. Again, that's an example of supranationalism. Okay, so let's talk about effects of communication on supranationalism. So advances of communication have also facilitated, right, which have aided and made it easier for supranationalism to happen and be effective. So again, you've got three bullets here. So communication technologies can impact supranationalism in three different ways. It connects people and countries faster, right? We want to think about time space compression here, okay, because it's across time and space. And then the second is it can link countries together that are involved in military alliances. Okay, that's the second reason. And that third reason, I'll move my little box here, is going to be linking markets and banks of economic alliances. Sorry. So that can kind of be applied to ESPN. Okay. All right, guys. And our last slide is going to talk about a new word here called democratization. Sorry if I can say it, democratization. And that is the introduction of a democratic system or just democratic ideas. So if you want your people to have the right to vote, that is going to be a democratic principle. Okay. And then effects of this are going to be two bullets here. I can't see this very well. Yes, two bullets. So advances in communication have facilitated democratization, and that's where you have communication technologies bringing outside information to people who live in these autocratic countries, okay, which might be like a dictatorship. So think about like North Korea, where people in North Korea are under a dictatorship of Kim Jong-un, and they don't have any kind of information outside of their country because everything is controlled of what they get to listen to. Okay, and then another bullet there is communication technologies make it easier for groups to send information and get support from outside forces. Okay, all right, so that is the end of 4.8, you guys. That is all for today. We'll push out 4.9 and 4.10 the next day remote. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.